of running our entire economy. And we have to do that in a way that maintains and enhances our way of life and leaves no one behind. Now, there is no better place on Earth to prosper from global efforts to reduce our emissions than right here in Australia. We are blessed with some of the best renewable resources anywhere in the world. We can be a clean energy superpower and help the rest of the world reduce their emissions as well. We can do that through things like the Sun Cable project, a solar battery project which will provide cheap, reliable, clean power to meet up to 20% of Singapore's electricity demand. We can do it by using our renewable energy to create hydrogen to fuel the transport systems and industrial processes that our friends and allies around the world will need. Countries like Japan, Korea, and Germany, who have already set out their plans to transition their economies to a hydrogen-based future. We can do it by using our renewable energy to create low emissions products that other countries will need to decarbonize. Products like steel, aluminium, and ammonia. Huge job creating and growth driving opportunities that we would be mad to miss out on. But these opportunities are not just going to fall in our laps. We're going to need to be proactive and grab them if we do not want to get left behind. The reality is that there's a global race underway. Last year, I spoke at a forum in Germany, and I made the case for New South Wales and Australia to provide that country with the hydrogen that it needs to decarbonize. And after I spoke, I was followed on stage by the Moroccan energy minister. And he said, don't worry about Australia. We've got sun, we're closer to Europe, and we actually take climate change seriously. How our country responds to climate change is not only going to impact our planet, it's also going to impact our future prosperity. Now, no section of our community has a greater interest in making sure we get this right than young people. Make no mistake, the decisions we make today are going to shape the future of the world that we all live in. So my message to you is simple. You have the right and the ability to help shape that future and be part of building the type of country that we all want to see. Now, every generation has had to fight for progress. Our grandparents' generation went to war to protect our freedoms against tyranny and fascism. They came back from the war and they built a fair, egalitarian Australia where no matter where you were born or the circumstances of your situation, through hard work, you could get ahead in this country. Our parents' generation fought for the right to decide for ourselves what we do with our bodies. It is their generation that fought for greater civil rights, greater rights for women, and who delivered greater rights for Indigenous Australians. Over the last 30 years, Australians around the country have advocated for and fought for equality for same-sex couples. Whether it be in fighting the AIDS epidemic, providing same-sex couples with the right to be married, or simply providing members of our LGBTI community the respect that the love they have for their partners is as beautiful and sacred as the love between any other couple. In all of these movements, it's been young people leading the charge for social change. Young people may not have held the levers of power, but they held the power to move the country forward. That's because social change is not just brought about at an election. It's not just brought about by a vote in our parliament. It's brought about by the conversations that we have around the dinner table. It's brought about by the companies that we want to work for, the companies we invest in, and by the products we buy. It's brought about by publicly minded citizens who can see a better country and commit to persuading, explaining, and campaigning to bring it about. People not simply accepting our country for the way it is, or allowing the vested interests and powerful voices to stand in the way of a better future. And time again, it's been our young people who dreamt of a better future for our country and have had the boldness and the courage to turn those into reality. It has historically been young people who have not been bound by the past, but who have been energized by the future. So the challenge of our time is to protect our environment whilst growing the economy. And it's critically important we do both, and we can do both. We have inherited a strong and prosperous country from our parents, And we have a responsibility to make our country stronger still. That's why it's the centre of Australian politics that needs to lead the charge on decarbonising our economy. The centre and the centre-right of Australian politics has a proud history of protecting our environment. It was the Liberal Party that stopped drilling for oil on the Great Barrier Reef. It was the Liberal Party that established our national parks network in New South Wales. It was the Liberal Party that established the EPA in this state. It is a conservative principle that we're not merely the custodians of the present, but we're also the guardians of the future. Centre and centre-right governments around the world are leading their countries to take decisive and responsible action on climate change. Angela Merkel's government in Germany, Boris Johnson's government in the UK, Emmanuel Macron's government in France. If we leave it to the left, taking action on climate change will be about redefining the role of capitalism in society. If we leave it to the far right, we will succumb to the myth that climate change is not real, that it does not impact us, and that it's too costly and it's too hard to do anything about it. We need the centre of Australian politics to refine its voice in the climate change debate. We need the centre of Australian politics, which believes in the power of science, to refine its voice in this debate. The centre of Australian politics, which believes in that the same scientific methods, tools and techniques which took us to the moon, cured disease, provided us with the technology that defines much of our lives, and expanded our horizons and understanding of the natural world, is our guide on the impacts of climate change. We need the centre of Australian politics, which believes in the power of markets, free enterprise, and liberal trade to fuel innovation and prosperity. The things that have underwritten our success as a nation and world success, and success more broadly on the world stage. We need that centre of Australian politics to be engaged in the biggest debate of our lifetime on what the future of our country should be. And that's what's at stake. The approach we take on climate change defines the sort of country that we will live in and the type of people that we are. Are we a country that wants to bury our head in the sand to the scientific evidence, to the cost of inaction on climate change, and to the economic waves rippling around the world? Are we a country that believes in science, but not in economics, which have provided us with unparalleled prosperity? Or are we a country which believes in the power of the human mind to understand our natural and commercial worlds, which has the confidence to believe that we can address the challenges of our time in the same way that generations before us have done to build a better future? By joining groups like this, you are answering these questions. By talking about climate change and the action that we need to take to address it with our friends, your family, your employers, your university, your banks, and with the media who are listening on this call right now, you are changing the country. The great waves of change that have swept across our country, that have lifted the watermark of progress, have come on the back of a rising tide of public support for a better vision for what our country can be. And each time that tide has been built on millions of conversations of Australians persuading others of the need for change. That's been the power that younger generations of Australians have wielded to improve our country in the past. And that's the power that you hold to persuade our country of a better path today. So thank you so much for joining C4C. Thank you so much for joining this great organisation. And I look forward to working with you to make our country an even better place to live, to work, and to raise a family. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matt, for, as usual, very inspiring words. And most of all, thank you for your energy, your vision, and the work you've been doing on that front, and for making yourself available to us and to our young members. So now I'd like to briefly introduce our executive director, for those who haven't met him yet, Leo Shanahan, who's the former media editor of The Australian and also former co-host of Business Weekend on Sky News. Leo has been working with us for the last 2 months and working really closely with our Youth for Conservation group. So I asked him tonight to give you a little bit of an idea about his strategy and some feedback on our activities and future events.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, I suppose, thank you firstly, Matt, for those great words. It's really good to have someone like yourself on board, obviously, and your support of C4C in the last couple of months. To me, it was a big surprise, really finding out about this group when I joined and how far it had really come. And I suppose I was really interested in the intellectual challenge of why it was that centre-right conservative politics was viewed in Australia as unable to achieve goals in whether it's in broader environmental policy, lowering emissions and energy policy, because really around the world, that's not the case. And then when you really look at it, I think the centre-right and conservatives in Australia have done a great deal. It's just done in a manner that is more consistent with their social and political philosophy. And I think that in climate and emissions and energy, it's got huge potential to continue, and I think is showing through the achievements of governments like Matt's and the federal government that it can actually achieve in this area of policy that's so important. So I suppose to start off with, as Christina said, I came from business journalism primarily, even though I've worked in politics as well. And a lot of my work in the last couple of months has been dealing with business and really communicating that message between business and government, how they see these goals in lowering emissions and moving towards some of the goals we have, such as net zero by 2050, and how that can be achieved in an economically and environmentally sustainable way. I've also got a bit of a background in consultancy and campaigning. So as I said, I was really interested in why conservative or centre-right politics is not viewed as being successful and on this topic and in this policy area. And what I've been trying to do, I suppose, is broaden that church, open the tent and use whatever clumsy analogy you like, but I guess to make it clear to MPs and thinkers and those in business that this is not some left-wing craziness. You can be part of conservative or centre-right politics and have a role and serve a real function in this area of policy in Australia. And I think that's been demonstrated by some of the amazing forums we've been having and the success of those, some of the commentary and language from Gladys Berejiklian, obviously one of the most senior centre-right conservative leaders in the country, with Theresa May, former UK Prime Minister. We had Malcolm Turnbull, of course, with David Cameron earlier as well. And we've got the Federal Environment Minister, Susan Lee, coming up in the next couple of weeks on another panel. And Angus Taylor's been good enough as well to join us once in the last few months and will join us again in November to discuss so much of what the government's been doing in the last few months. Look, not everyone's in agreement with everything the government does, and that's not the point of the forum for everyone to agree. But I think what the government is showing is real desire and capacity for change. And look, you don't have to agree, and that's a really important point. But I think what this forum and this group and those within centre-right and conservative politics might have the capacity, much more so than the left, to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this. Because for so many years, I think people have left this policy area to the left and they haven't achieved it. And I think what, as I said, governments like Matt's are showing and the federal government is a real capacity to want to achieve something. And I think you can be very much part of that. So thanks so much for your interest. And I'd like to now introduce Riley Taylor, who's on the board of C4C and is the first chair of Youth for Conservation.
Thanks, Leo. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I would like to just quickly extend my gratitude to Minister Kean for taking time out of his very busy schedule to be with us all tonight. The Minister is a political hero of mine due to his extensive and exceptionally effective advocacy on environmental issues, and he's no doubt a role model for many attending tonight's webinar. I'd also like to thank my fellow board directors for their advice and guidance, and of course, everyone who has taken the time to attend tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Riley Taylor, and I'm the chair of the Youth for Conservation group. This is an incredibly important organisation. Youth for Conservation is emerging as a platform for young people all across Australia to discuss environmental policy in a rational and sensible way. And I'm sure many of you have noticed that platforms espousing scientifically and economically responsible solutions to environmental issues are few and far between in the increasingly polarised political climate. And this has been exacerbated by what can only really be described as a growing wave of apathy towards our political system amongst young people and the ever important role government plays in environmental stewardship. I've seen firsthand the effect this has on people of my generation. We end up feeling isolated and caught between nonsensical political extremes. We as rational Australians who care for our beautiful country cannot afford to surrender the youth to these extreme perspectives or indeed to that apathy. It is my ambition that Youth for Conservation will ensure that we are given a voice and a place in the rational centre and not be pigeonholed into alarmist speculation or denialism. It is only natural that an organisation such as ours should take leadership in this space. Environmentalism is a value inherent to both liberalism and conservatism, and indeed one inherent to the Liberal Party itself. This is self-evident, as Edmund Burke, the architect of modern conservatism, once urged his contemporaries not to commit waste on the inheritance, hazarding to leave to those who come after them a ruin instead of habitation. Detractors from this sensible position may claim ambition and innovation in the environmental policy space is not economically or politically feasible, but I don't think I need to highlight how incorrect this is. With renewable energy and alternative fuel sources like hydrogen becoming a rapidly approaching reality. You need only to look to comparable countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, and France, where centre and centre-right governments have become global leaders in environmental advocacy. We, as young liberals, young conservatives, indeed any rational young person, need to embrace the economic future of our nation. We need to be advocates who speak from empiricism and not simply rhetoric which borders on and sometimes crosses into the deranged. Now that's enough from me. We'll open up the floor to the questions to the Minister now, which I'm sure there are many. So we'll start off with, from Solio Goodsward. Minister, I'd like to get your thoughts about the federal government's proposed amendments to the EPBC Act. Do you think they will shelve the bill given there's no Senate support?
So I've been pretty vocal on my views around the EPBC Act. I think Graham Samuel, who is not a noted environmentalist or greenie, in fact, he's an economically rational business guy, has made some excellent recommendations. One of those recommendations was around making sure that we have a strong environmental cop on the beat, the equivalent of a federal EPA. And he made that recommendation with good reason. There's no point having strong environmental laws unless they're going to be enforced. So it's one thing for people to debate whether or not our laws go too far in protecting the environment or to the detriment of business. That's perfectly fine. But the idea that a Conservative government wouldn't be looking to uphold the rule of law doesn't fit within our belief system. So I'm actually arguing not only the position supported by the environmental groups, I'm arguing the position that should be supported by Conservatives and people who care about upholding the rule of law. We should continue to fight to uphold the rule of law, whether it be in the environment space or anywhere else. That's what I'll continue to do. So I hope that the federal government adopts the recommendations made by Professor Samuel. I think if they do that, then it will sail through the Senate.
Well said. So the next question comes from a young Liberal named Kean Smith. Do calls for government-backed gas generation to replace Lidl represent an unnecessary intervention in the energy market?
Look, clearly the market signals that are there to incentivise new investment in generation, transmission and storage have not been working. That's one of the reasons we're not seeing new infrastructure being built. That's a real problem because it's seen our prices go up and it's led to less reliability in the grid. There will need to be an element of government intervention. But as far as I'm concerned, we need to be making decisions based on the evidence and the science. If you're doing that, you should also be making decisions about what's the cheapest way to deliver reliable energy to the citizens and businesses of New South Wales and indeed across the country. And if you're going to take that economically rational approach, then the benefit that will also see cleaner forms of energy installed into the system. So my view is that government should be supporting technology which will deliver the cheapest form of reliable energy possible. And right now, that's not gas, that's not coal, that's certainly not nuclear. It's wind and solar backed up by pumped hydro and batteries. And those technologies are coming further down the cost curve. So we shouldn't just support those technologies because they're good for the environment. We should do it because it's good for families and businesses across this state, and we want to lower electricity prices. And the spin-off of that, Kean, is that lower electricity prices don't just benefit families and businesses in New South Wales. They will give us a global competitive advantage as we move towards a low carbon economy. That will create more jobs. That will create better living standards and underwrite our prosperity into the future. So those people arguing for coal, for nuclear, for gas, they're actually arguing for more expensive, dirtier forms of energy. We should be arguing for the cheapest forms of reliable energy. That today, not said by me, not said by politicians, is said by experts, scientists and economists to be wind, solar and pumped hydro. That's the future for New South Wales. And the sooner we move towards that, the sooner we set ourselves up to take advantage of the enormous opportunities that are emerging as we move towards a low carbon global economy.
On competitive advantage, Daniel Denal has asked, in light of Germany identifying Australia as a potential major supplier of hydrogen needed to power its heavy industry, how do we make most of this opportunity? How quickly do we need to act to have a competitive advantage?
Well, as I said in my speech, Daniel, there's a global race on right now. We can actually go out and grab the opportunities and set ourselves up for success in a low carbon global economy, or we can stick our head in the sand and be left behind. And if we do that, what it will mean is that Australians will lose jobs, they will lose opportunities, and we won't enjoy the living standards that our parents and their parents enjoyed. So what we need to do is to move to cheaper forms of reliable energy that are also happening to be clean, so that we can continue to sell our goods and services into those markets that are demanding new types of products that are low carbon in their intensity. So we need to get on board. We know there's these huge emerging markets, Germany, Japan, South Korea. Alan Finkel, the chief scientist of the country, has looked into the opportunities that hydrogen will bring. And he claims that the hydrogen economy will be bigger than the total of all our coal exports. So if we want a piece of that action, we should be grabbing it now. Now, we know that coal will still play a role into the future, but we need to also understand that the markets currently demanding coal are starting to shift away from that and looking for cleaner, cheaper forms of energy. And we're well placed to take advantage of those opportunities.
The next one comes from Tamika Dartnell-Moore. Minister, you mentioned the opposition from the far right on climate change. How do we convince people, including our own colleagues within the coalition, that there is a need to transition to renewable energy?
We convince them by arguing the facts. And the facts are that the cheapest way to deliver energy to families, the cheapest form of reliable energy that will benefit families and businesses in New South Wales and indeed across the country today is wind, solar, pumped hydro and batteries. That's the future for New South Wales. Indeed, that's the future for the country. We've got some of the best renewable resources anywhere on the planet. Right now, the cost of delivering energy from those sources is only capital in nature. We've got record low interest rates. So now is the time to be investing in things that will improve the productivity of this country for the future. And nothing will improve the productivity for our future more than installing low-cost forms of reliable energy into the system. That means lower energy prices, that means new jobs, that means investments going into the regions, that means that we'll be able to set ourselves up to be an energy and economic superpower as the world transitions to a low-carbon future.
The next question comes from David Brady. What are the types of incentives our government and Australian businesses can provide to our next generation of young Australians to pursue climate change technologies and science that will be developed here, innovated here, and built here in New South Wales and Australia?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dave. I mean, one of the great missed opportunities for our country is the fact that we developed solar PV panels right here in Australia. It was Professor Martin Green out of the University of New South Wales that pioneered that technology in the 80s. And instead of grabbing and setting up the manufacturing industry right here in Australia, we let it go offshore. Now the biggest manufacturer of solar panels anywhere on the planet is China. So no one will benefit more than China as we move towards a low carbon future. And that's why they're moving in that direction. We need to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity like the one we missed in the 80s. And that's why the technology that we're developing here around wind, around hydro, around hydrogen, we need to make sure that we're building those products right here in Australia and creating the jobs and opportunities that come with that. So yes, government does need to play a role in providing the playing field and also the incentives to get those industries started here. I want to make sure that we get a competitive advantage right here in Australia because of our low-cost energy. That's good for families and businesses, but it's also great for the new opportunities to create heavy manufacturing, new industries right here in Australia. That's great for our economy and great for our future. So government has a really important role to play, and we can't afford to miss the opportunities that are emerging.
The next question comes from Kat Naish. A letter will be delivered to Scott Morrison tomorrow asking him to advance federal government funding to supply and install solar panels and batteries on all schools throughout Australia. Do you think it is possible for such an initiative to provide electricity to schools during the day and term times, saving schools money, and use the solar and battery facilities at those schools at the weekends, during holidays, and at night time to stabilise the grid?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, the way we're going to deliver clean, low-cost energy across New South Wales is there's going to be a range of methods that we do that. One of those will be distributed energy, using our assets, whether they be private roofs across New South Wales or government roofs across New South Wales to install solar panels to be able to reduce demand when we need it. So we know that schools operate from 9 till 3 when the sun's shining. So what a great way to reduce electricity prices for schools by matching their electricity demand to the supply that comes from solar PV. So yes, that's exactly what we need to do. It's why the New South Wales government has put out all its government assets out to tender to ensure that we can get low-cost solar installed on schools across New South Wales, transport facilities across New South Wales, to help add to the energy mix that will ensure that we keep the lights on, reduce prices, and transition to a clean energy future.
The next question comes from Luke Kennedy. Luke asks, how do we move forward on climate change at a federal level, or will action have to come from the states thanks to the political quagmire of climate change at a federal level?
Well, I think the federal government is moving forward when it comes to climate change. And we saw that only last week. We saw that, members of the coalition previously, earlier this year, were advocating for an extension of the Liddell coal-fired power station. An extension of the Liddell coal-fired power station, which would have meant our system was less reliable. Taxpayer money would have been spent to deliver electricity that would be more expensive for businesses and families across this state. They moved away from that position, and they've now talked about a gas peaker as an alternative. So they are moving away from the positions that they've held previously, but there's a lot more to do. The states are showing great leadership in this space. Every state and territory has a commitment to achieve net zero emissions. And let's not forget the Commonwealth has that commitment as well. They signed up to the Paris Agreement, which says that Australia will participate in limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius by mid this century. In order to achieve that, the science tells us that we need to get to net zero emissions by 2050. So the Commonwealth has signed up to that, and all the states and territories are on board. And what I want to see is a race to ensure that we do get there in a way that grows our economy and gives us cheaper energy prices. And that's what our focus is on in New South Wales. Ensuring that we get there in a way that doesn't destroy jobs, but it creates jobs. Doesn't take away opportunities, but creates them. Grows our economy, not diminishes it. That's how we as Liberals should be tackling climate change. Making decisions based on the science and the evidence and the economically rational position, not the ideology and not the populism of the far right.
The next question comes from Jackie Munro. Jackie asks, Minister, could you please explain the state government's position on the federal government's announcement that Australia's energy mix must include gas, particularly as decisions like the Narrabee gas project rest with the New South Wales government?
Well, look, let's get the facts on the table. there will be a role for fossil fuels into the future. We know that there will still be markets for coal into the future, but those markets are changing. We know that we need dispatchable energy into the system as we see more renewables go into the system. So gas will play a role in the short term. But we also know that there is cheaper and cleaner forms of energy coming online. By the time Snowy Hydro is installed into the system, that will provide an additional 2,000 megawatts of cheap, reliable energy. So the business case for gas is on the clock. We should be making decisions based on the economics. Gas is a hugely expensive way of generating electricity. So it may be useful in the short term, but as we get cheaper technologies, as we get cheaper ways to deliver energy, we should be moving towards that, not making decisions based on the outcomes, but not making decisions based on how we generate the electricity, making decisions on whether we get the electricity when we need it in the cheapest form possible. And if we stick to those principles, then let me tell you, gas is not part of the mix. It's solar, wind, pumped hydro, and batteries. But could gas play a role in the short term? Absolutely. But if you're a betting person and you saw cheaper forms of cleaner technology coming down the pipeline, let me tell you, you won't be betting taxpayer dollars on gas.
All right, I think we have time for one last question. And the last one comes from Bronwyn Elmore. Bronwyn says, thank you for the excellent work you do in progressing the importance of good environmental policy. What will it take to get multilateral support between all political parties for the need to urgently decarbonize the economy?
Well, politics has held us back on tackling climate change and installing cheap, reliable energy into the system for the last decade. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that Australians are paying more for their electricity because politics has got in the way. It's not acceptable that we're not in a position to take advantage of the emerging markets that could underwrite our prosperity because politics has got in the way. It's time for the centre of Australian politics to stand up and be counted. This debate has been dominated by the noisy voices on the left and the angry voices on the far right. And neither of them have delivered the results that we need to ensure that we're a prosperous nation now and into the future. Neither of them have delivered the results we need to create jobs and ensure that no one's left behind. And that's why there's a very important role for this organisation, you people that are members of it, and young people in general. Those people who care about our environment and are economically rational have to enter the fray, have to enter this debate and stand up and be counted. The angry voices have held us back for too long, and it's time for sensible, centrist people to get into the debate and win this, because there's nothing less than the future of our country depending on it.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hand over to Natalie Hissey, another one of the executives of Youth for Conservation, to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Riley. Can you hear me? Is that all good? Yeah, great. Look, Matt, I recall seeing a very popular tweet of yours a few weeks ago where you said, what could be more in line with conservative values than leaving our planet to our kids better than we found it? And I think that this strikes to the heart of why our party is so lucky to have you, Matt. You are clearly articulating that it is not a contradictory idea to be both a Liberal and to be concerned about climate change. We are the party best placed to provide sensible, centrist and equitable policy in this space. And that strikes the right balance. And it's no mean feat to speak truth to power, especially when you are yourself in power. We thank you for that, and we're backing you all the way. So keep doing what you're doing. I would like to say very quickly, thank you to Christina and Leo and all of the C4C team for working so hard to give young people a voice, which is so integral to this debate. And to Riley, our fearless leader, who has the creativity, the ideas and the energy to really make a difference in this space. And to everyone on this call, younger and older, you are the changing face of the Liberal Party. You are the people that are going to bring this movement forward. And we're so grateful that you've joined us. Thank you.
Thank you,
Natalie.
That's all the thank yous. That's fantastic. And yeah, thanks again to Christina and Riley. And of course, Matt, thanks so much. That was really, really good of you. And I know your time is valuable. So thanks again. And that's all for this evening. Our next
before we go, we have to announce our next events. And we're having two very exciting events in October. One is the Biodiversity and Sustainability Forum with Minister Susan Lee. She will join us on the 12th of October. If you are interested in the topic, we'll be discussing sustainability, we'll be discussing agriculture, the oceans, and a lot of other things, and the EPBC Act as well. And on the 19th, we're going to have the pleasure of hosting the UK Minister for Energy, Kwasi Kwarteng. He will be possibly joined by Dave Sharma, and we'll be discussing a post-COVID recovery, how the UK, what they're doing with their climate change net zero target, and also the renewable energy sector in Australia. So if you guys want to join and you haven't yet had the chance to go on our website, please join www.coalitionforconservation.com.au. And I'll let Leo wrap up.
Oh, no, that's it.
All done.
I've done everything necessary. Yes, but all right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for this evening and your attendance. And yeah, we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Matt, again.